Hey guys, so we are back today with another bullet journal video, and this one is themed after my favorite book series, currently at least, for the past 5 years probably, and it's the Captive Prince trilogy from CS Pacat. The books are freaking amazing, and I love them, and they are so complex and interesting and gay, which is great. They they are fantasy books. So the first page that I do is the map of the fantasy world they are living in, and the main things happen in Ver and Achielos, which are two countries mostly made from France and Greece. So it's interesting, and I cannot stop recommending them because they are really amazing books. They talk about so many things. They are pretty heavy. The first book mainly, it is pretty toxic, and it talks about slavery and about ethic and sex practice and abuse that really shouldn't happen. And it also talks about trauma and grief, but it's not that it's not heavy. It's not the kind of book that you know is hard to read. It's very entertaining. It goes very fast. When you start reading them, usually you finish them in like 3 days because if you can. Actually, I was lucky enough to have bought the book after the third one was out, so I didn't have to wait, which I am pretty lucky about that, and I really love them. They they are freaking amazing, and I really wish you read them. And also, they have the big plus that the fandom on Tumblr, at least, is one of the less dramatic and toxic that I found on Tumblr. It's a lot less than a lot of the others, and we all love each other a lot, and it's pretty cheerful and good. A lot of people think that it's really bad and that we'll have a slave master king that is going on because one of them is a prince and one of them is a slave. So you will think, reading only the first, that you will have that dynamic going on for all the books, but it really doesn't. It's really you really have to go through the first book and keep going to the second book because it's not gonna be like that. They are they are very complex feelings, and it's a complex dynamic, and it doesn't end up in just slave master dynamic. It's not that kind of book. And yeah, I really love it. And damn, that fucking map took me fucking forever, but it's okay. I love it. I really I really enjoy doing this particular month of bullet journal, and I was good enough to make it all in one setting, and I spent 7 hours on it. And it was on a Sunday. I was working at that time, so I spent all of my Sunday on it, and went to work on on Monday. And people were like, "Why do you do that?" And I was like, "I don't care. I love it. It's pretty." I hated myself because I decided to do a lot of gold accent because the gold is the main aesthetic of the movie. Because the main character, the slave, has gold cuffs to represent him as a sex slave, which means that he has gold about everywhere, and when he is ornated with jewels, they are pretty usually gold, and the other main character has golden hair, so gold is really present in it. So I really wanted to have a lot of gold all through the bullet journal month, and I did. The big problem of that was that to make the gold, I had to paint first a beige color in watercolor, then waiting it for it to dry, and then I did some shadows with some brown watercolor paint, and then I painted over it with some gold paint, which is not opaque enough to stand on its own. So I needed the base colors underneath it. which means that I had, for every gold detail in the fucking month, I had 3 coats of it, which needed to dry completely, and it took really 7 hours to do it, but it's okay because it really looked really good. It looked a little heavy maybe, but it's still so far one of my favorite months. I'm very, very proud of having doing it. So yeah. The other thing that is known about the book is that the sexual content is pretty heavy in it. First, because there are full sex scenes, a couple of them, like 3 of them, I think. And before that, there are a lot of graphic representation of rapes and not ceremonial, but sex for show made by pets, which are not exactly sex slave, but not that far from it. They are free and under contract to do that to the nobles, but frankly, they're not very far from sex slaves. They're just paid for it, even if not a lot. And it's a very toxic royal court that is happening in there, and there is a lot of sex stuff, public sex stuff, and very toxic domination at dynamics, and it's really, really toxic. And the main character, which narrates the book, Damon, is not from there. He's from Aquelos, and he doesn't understand at all that dynamic because it's very toxic and it's very different from the one he is accustomed to. And it's very interesting to have his point of view because his point of view is, of course, flawed. He is a pretty naive character. He is very, very smart and very intelligent, but he is also very naive, which means that he was naive enough to not see that his lover was going to put him in chain, and he didn't see anything of what happened to him. He didn't see it coming at all, which for us it looks pretty naive because it was a little obvious when we know the backstory, and his best friend is very mad at him because he warned him and he didn't see it coming yet. But even if he is naive, he still has a good instinct, and when he sees something, he will think about it a lot, and even if it's in the background of his head, he will think about it again alone and piece it together with everything else to understand truth that are usually not shown or not understood by everybody else because they don't have the intelligence behind it to piece it up together. So he is very naive, but he's also very smart and he has good instinct, which means that the narrative is pretty interesting because it's a point of view that it's flawed, but it's interesting because it's narrow on some things that us as reader, we see them and we are like, how can you not see what is happening? Because his point of view as a fallen prince, because he was a prince, is so narrow because he doesn't imagine that happening to him, so he doesn't imagine that happening to anyone else because it's not something that he's familiar with. So he's a little flawed because he's a little naive. He doesn't imagine that happening to anyone because it's not how it works in his country and how it works around him before that. But it's also, he is very smart. He is a big army general. He's very good at it. He knows how to do stuff. He knows how to lead a country, how to lead an army. He knows politics. He knows all of that. He is very smart, and he doesn't show it. He is also very good in languages, which means that he speaks fluently Russian even if the two countries are at war. So it's surprising that he knows the languages of his enemies so well, but it's interesting. And yeah, the other character is Laurence, which is his honor because he's the opposite prince of the of the other country. He is from there. He is the crown prince and is supposed to become king during the month after his arrival, which is complicated because in a court as toxic and wrong as theirs, it's always interesting to see that he's supposed to inherit the throne and the crown in a few months, but it's not gonna happen because he's probably gonna get killed before that, even if it took a little while for Damon to realize that. And eventually he was forced to go on border duty and fight against Achilleans for the border, in the constant rivalry there is on the border. And he really didn't want to go before because he knew he was going to die, probably, most likely. And he decided to take Damon with him to try not to die, because Damon and Laurent realized that they needed to ally so they could save their countries from the ones that send Damon to there to be killed mostly, and the one that tried to kill Laurent. So they needed to ally even if they hated each other so fucking much. And it's interesting to see the dynamic change eventually, because they're forced to ally, so it's very enemies to allies first, because they really don't have a choice. They really need to get together, or else the both kingdoms would go to ruin. So they can't afford that. They are still princes, they are still future kings, and they have responsibilities towards their countries and their throne and their people, and that's what make them together at first. And yes, it's been complicated. At first, being allies was not easy. They have personality that clash a lot together because they are very, very different. And the relationship evolved slowly, and you see it, and that's why you have to stick to the second book, because it evolves softly and genuinely. So it's very organic. It's not at all something that seems fake because you want them to have sex. It's really something interesting to see the dynamic in the relationship evolve in something that is not predictable, but also very predictable, because even if their personality clash, they are in the end very compatible because they complement each other. And when one of them has something that is not easy for him to do, the other is very comfortable doing it. So they really are a great team. And eventually they get more comfortable together, they work together, they sleep in the same tent because they don't have a choice. So they spend most of the day together, and they forcefully have to learn to know the other and learn to get along and work together for the best. And eventually they develop a lot of feelings, and it's also fun because Damon is constantly horny. Is one of the horniest person I've ever seen. And it's a running joke in the fandom. He spent the three books being constantly horny, and not only for Laurent, for everybody. It's very, very interesting. And so even despite the horniness, you see the genuine, real feelings evolve, and it's very, very interesting. And eventually they become lovers, and then enemies again, and then allies again, and and then more lovers, and they end up well. So yeah, it's really my favorite series of books. It's not my favorite book. My favorite book is still Notre Dame de Paris, but I don't feel like I'm ever gonna write any fanfiction of Notre Dame de Paris. But I do write a lot of fanfiction for Lamen, for Captive Prince, and it's really cool. And I wrote a lot of it, and I read a lot of it. It's been my main OTP for quite a long time, and even if I am currently in a Malek phase, which I hate because Malek is not, it's not easy to find good fanfiction of. I want to go back to Lamen eventually, because Lamen is a really good OTP and the fanfiction are really good, they are very varied and very interesting, and it's not that the book is missing anything, but the book took path that ended up where it ended up in a happy ending, which is good. But there are a lot of ways that could have gone wrong, could have gone differently, because they took choice, or they make choice all the time that made every path different. And it's interesting in fanfiction to see all of those paths, if they were not taken, or everything would have changed, everything would have been different. And personally, I really love hurt, so I write a lot of hurt. So every path that leads to them not having their happy ending and one of them dying mostly, I will write them because I really like them. And also there are a lot of topics that are complicated and make people revisit their own trauma in a very healthy way, because revisiting it through someone else makes it easier to cope and to understand and to make peace with it. So it's interesting to see most of the fandom having to go through their own trauma, so using the characters and how they go through their own to to learn to cope with them. And it's interesting to see them explore the characters and what the trauma did to them, what the trauma, the grief, everything that happened to them, and even see them in modern settings and see how all the different worlds and all the different atmospheres and alternate universe would have affected them. And that's because the characters were really well written. They are not two dimensions, they are really deep and complicated and human, and none of them is perfect. Laurent is a bitch, is has a lot of flaws, he has a lot of bad person characters, um, characters sides, and he's very complex. And yes, at core we do believe he's a good person, but through the first book we hate these guts, and it's interesting to see that. So it's interesting to see that the characters are complex, and it's interesting to write them. So I wrote them a lot, and I read them a lot, and I really recommend for you to do the same. So yeah, it's looked like that. There is a lot of gold, there is a lot of work, and it took a lot of me, but it's totally worth it. It's so beautiful, and I loved going through it, and I love going back to it because it's still very beautiful. I love it. That was my Lamen Captive Prince journal, and I hope you liked it. I loved doing it, and I loved showing it to you. So bye!